On the morning the world was celebrating family, I found myself sitting at a table set for four, realized I was only worth a sticky note to the son I gave everything to. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. My name is ZAHA, and I'm 68 years old. I have always believed that a home is measured by its smells. For 40 years, my house smelled of the life I was building for my son, Michael. It smelled of sawdust when I stayed up late building him a toy chest. It smelled of expensive ink when I worked extra hours at the firm to pay for his private tutors. It smelled of the lilac perfume my late wife wore until the day the house went quiet after her funeral. But on Christmas Eve, my house smelled of hope. I had spent 3 days preparing. My 68-year-old joints ached from the effort, but I didn't care. I had roasted a prime rib, the outer crust perfectly seasoned with rosemary and garlic. I had made the cranberry tart Juana liked, the one with the lattice crust that took me 4 hours to perfect because my hands aren't as steady as they used to be. I stood in my living room, looking at the tree. It was a magnificent fir, decorated with ornaments that told the story of Michael's life. The ceramic handprint from kindergarten, the tiny pewter diploma from his graduation, the silver frame from his and Juana's wedding. They'll be here by 10 tomorrow, I whispered to the empty room. Michael had promised. Dad, we're doing a real family Christmas this year. No work, no distractions. Just us. I had bought them gifts that I could barely afford on my pension. A high-end espresso machine for Juana, who always complained about my old-fashioned percolator. A vintage watch for Michael, a twin to the one my own father had given me. I wanted them to feel the weight of my love in every box. Before I tell you about the silence that greeted me when the sun rose on Christmas morning, a silence so loud it felt like a scream, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family? Have you ever realized that you were the only one holding on to a tradition while everyone else was looking for the exit? Let me know in the comments. Is there anything more painful than realizing you're a duty rather than a destination? I went to bed that night with a smile on my face. I dreamed of the sound of Michael's laughter and the way the house would feel alive again. I dreamed of being more than just a man who lived in a house. I dreamed of being a father who was wanted. I woke up at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. The light was a cold, pale blue, filtering through the frost on the windows. I stayed in bed for a moment, listening. I expected to hear the sound of a key in the lock. I expected to hear the muffled thud of suitcases or the chime of Michael's voice. Nothing. I got up, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I walked into the kitchen. The table was set. The gold-rimmed plates were waiting. The napkins were folded into neat triangles. I looked at my phone. There were no missed calls. No Merry Christmas texts. I walked to the front door. There, tucked under the edge of my welcome mat, was a small, cream-colored envelope. My heart leapt. Maybe they were playing a game? Maybe they were waiting in the driveway? I opened the envelope. Inside was a card with a picture of a tropical beach. In Juana's perfect, loopy script, it read, "Hi ZAHA. Michael and I realized we were just so burned out. An opportunity for a last-minute villa in Tulum popped up, and we just couldn't say no. It's the mental health break we've been needing. We'll come by sometime after New Year's to do a late dinner. Hope you have a cozy day. Drink some cocoa for us. J&M." I stood in the doorway, the cold December wind whipping through my thin pajamas. I looked at the card. A last-minute villa. A mental health break. They hadn't forgotten. They had simply decided that a beach in Mexico was worth more than the man who had spent 40 years making sure they never had to worry about a roof over their heads. I walked back into the kitchen. The smell of the prime rib, cold now in the refrigerator, seemed to mock me. The cranberry tart sat on the counter, its lattice crust a beautiful, useless work of art. I sat down at the head of the table. I looked at the 3 empty chairs. I realized then that I wasn't just alone on Christmas. I was obsolete. To Michael and Juana, I was a line item in their lives, a late dinner to be scheduled when it was convenient, a person to be managed rather than a father to be loved. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, crystalline thing that settled in my marrow. I looked at the gifts under the tree, the espresso machine, the watch, and then I looked at my own hands. They were the hands of a man who had built a life for someone else. I realized that if I spent this day mourning them, I was giving them the one thing they didn't deserve, my spirit. I stood up. I didn't put the food away. I didn't turn off the lights. I walked to the phone and I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. St. Jude's Soup Kitchen? I asked, my voice steady. My name is ZAHA. I have a 20-pound prime rib and a cranberry tart, and I'm looking for a place to spend my Christmas. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange, terrifying spark of something I hadn't felt in a decade. It wasn't happiness. It was defiance. Michael and Michael's wife were in Tulum. They were drinking cocktails under a sun that didn't know my name. But here, in the cold, gray light of a house they had abandoned, I was starting to realize that the quiet peace I had sought wasn't something they could give me. It was something I had to take back. The drive to St. Jude's was the longest 3 miles of my life. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists on Christmas morning when the rest of the world is tucked away in the warmth of shared laughter and the rustle of wrapping paper. My old sedan hummed, the heater struggling to push back the chill that had settled into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. In the back seat, the prime rib was wrapped in heavy foil, and the cranberry tart sat in a box, protected like a holy relic. Every time I hit a bump in the road, I felt a pang of resentment. I had built that meal for a son who was currently thousands of miles away, probably applying sunscreen and ordering a second round of mimosas. When I pulled up to the soup kitchen, the windows were fogged over from the steam of large industrial pots. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the salted pavement. A young man in a thin hoodie was leaning against the brick wall, blowing into his hands. He looked at me, then at the boxes I was carrying. "You the guy with the roast?" he asked, his voice raspy. "I am ZAHA," I said, "and I have more than just a roast." Inside, the atmosphere was a chaotic, beautiful mess. It didn't smell like the sterile perfection of my house. It smelled of onions, cheap coffee, and humanity. There were no designer coats here, no mental health breaks in Tulum. There were only people. People who had slipped through the cracks of the world. People who knew exactly what it felt like to be forgotten. I spent the next 6 hours in a whirlwind of service. I carved that prime rib into thin, succulent slices, placing them on plastic plates next to scoops of mashed potatoes. I saw eyes light up at the sight of the cranberry tart, eyes that hadn't seen a homemade lattice crust in years. Before I tell you about the man I met in the corner of that dining hall, a man who told me a story that made my own heartbreak feel like a luxury, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found your purpose in the place you least expected? Have you ever realized that the people who have the least are often the ones who can teach you the most about gratitude? Let me know in the comments. Sometimes, the best way to heal your own heart is to help someone else carry theirs. His name was Elias. He was 80, with skin like cured leather and a pair of hands that had clearly spent a lifetime in the dirt. He sat in the corner, eating slowly, savoring every bite of the meat I had prepared. "You cooked this, didn't you?" he asked as I walked by with a coffee pot. "I did," I said, sitting down for a moment. My hip was screaming, but the adrenaline kept me upright. "It tastes like pride," Elias said. "The kind of pride a man has when he's cooking for his own blood." "So where are they?" "Your blood." I felt the sting of the question, but I didn't hide from it. "Mexico. A villa. A last-minute opportunity." Elias chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The opportunity. My daughter lives 6 blocks from here. I haven't seen her in 3 years. She tells people I'm dead because a dead father is a tragedy, but a homeless father is an embarrassment. He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man who had been given a warning. "Listen to me, ZAHA," Elias said, leaning in. "A man spends his whole life building a house for his children, thinking the walls will keep them close. But walls don't hold people. Only love does. And if they don't have the love to stay, you shouldn't have the weakness to wait. You're 68. You still have a few miles left in the tank. Don't spend them idling in a driveway for a car that isn't coming back." I left St. Jude's at 4 p.m. The sun was already beginning to dip, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. I drove home, but I didn't feel the same crushing weight I had felt that morning. The house was still empty, yes. The gifts were still under the tree, but the silence didn't feel like a scream anymore. It felt like a question. I walked into the living room and looked at the espresso machine and the vintage watch. Click. My phone pings. A notification from social media. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did. It was a photo of Michael and Juana. They were on a boat, the sunset behind them a brilliant, mocking orange. They were clinking glasses, their teeth white against their tanned skin. The caption read, "Finally found some peace. Sorry we're missing the cold. Merry Christmas to all our friends back home. Tropical drink waterwave hashtag Tulum vibes hashtag living our best life hashtag no regrets." I looked at the hashtag no regrets. It was a knife to the heart. They weren't just away, they were proud of being away. They were celebrating the fact that they had escaped the burden of an old man's Christmas. I stood in the center of my perfect, quiet living room. I looked at the ceramic handprint on the tree. I looked at the silver frame. And then, I did something I hadn't done since Michael was a toddler. I felt a cold, white-hot flash of genuine rage. Not the kind of rage that makes you scream, but the kind that makes you move. I walked to the closet and pulled out a stack of empty boxes, the ones I had saved from my move 3 years ago. I began to strip the tree. I didn't do it gently. I pulled off the ceramic handprint. I pulled off the pewter diploma. I pulled off every single memory that tied me to a son who didn't want me. I packed them into the boxes with a clinical, mechanical efficiency. Next, I went to the kitchen. I took the espresso machine. I took the vintage watch. I put them back in their original shipping boxes. I wasn't going to give them these gifts. I wasn't going to be the good father who waited with open arms and a warm plate. I was going to be the man Elias told me to be. I was going to be the man who realized his value wasn't determined by the people who ignored him. I sat at my computer. My fingers, usually a bit stiff, flew across the keys. I logged into my travel portal. I looked at my savings, the money I had been hoarding for emergencies, or to help Michael with his next business venture. I am the emergency, I whispered. I booked a ticket. Not to Mexico. To Italy. I had always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast. My wife and I had talked about it for 30 years, but we always put it off. Next year, ZAHA. When Michael is done with school. When Michael is settled in his job. When Michael is married. There was no more next year. There was only now. I spent the rest of Christmas evening packing a suitcase. I didn't pack for a cozy day at home. I packed for a life I was finally claiming as my own. But as I was folding my shirts, the phone rang. It was Michael. I let it ring. I watched the screen glow in the dark room. He called again. On the third attempt, I picked up. "Dad? Hey, Merry Christmas." His voice was loud, buoyed by the sound of music and waves in the background. "Sorry we've been MIA. The service at the villa is spotty. Did you get the card? We felt so bad leaving you, but man, Juana really needed this. You wouldn't believe the infinity pool here." "I saw the photos, Michael," I said. My voice was different. It was flat. It was the voice of a man who was already halfway across the ocean. "Listen, we'll be back on the 2nd. We'll come by that night, okay? We can do the gifts then. And hey, I wanted to ask, I know it's a lot, but Benjamin's firm is doing that new merger and I'm a little short on the liquid capital for the buy-in. I was hoping we could talk about that loan we discussed." The loan. The capital. The infinity pool wasn't enough. The villa wasn't enough. He wanted the quiet peace fund too. He wanted the very thing that kept me safe, all while he was clinking glasses in the sun. "We'll talk about it when you get back, Michael," I said. "Great. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. Anyway, Juana's calling me for dinner. Have a good one. Love ya. Click." He didn't ask what I ate. He didn't ask if I was lonely. He didn't ask if I had even stayed in the house. He just asked for the money and hung up. I stood there, the phone heavy in my hand. I looked at the suitcase on my bed. I looked at the boxes of his memories sitting by the door. I realized then that Michael didn't love me. He loved the concept of me. He loved the safety net. He loved the man who would always say yes. I walked to my front door. I looked at the welcome mat where the card had been hidden. I picked up the card, the one with the beach and the mental health break note. I walked to the fireplace. I hadn't lit a fire all day. I took a match and struck it. I held the card over the flame until it caught. I watched the tropical beach curl into black ash. I watched Juana's loopy script disappear into the smoke. "Merry Christmas, Michael," I whispered. I went to my front door and I engaged the deadbolt. But I didn't stop there. I went to my laptop and I did something that would ensure Michael's return on the 2nd would be much more eventful than he expected. I listed the house. Not for rent. For sale. I was 68 years old, and I was done being a placeholder. I was done being a museum for a son who only visited when he needed a loan. Before I tell you about the text I sent Michael as I sat in the airport lounge on the 27th, the text that finally broke the silence for good, I want to ask you, have you ever made a choice that felt like burning your bridges, only to realize the bridges were leading you to a desert? Tell me in the comments. Is it better to be alone and free, or surrounded by family and invisible? The house was cold, but my heart was starting to burn. I spent the rest of the night in a state of crystalline focus. I was a man who had been a ghost for years, but the ghost was finally ready to haunt back. I didn't sleep much that night. I didn't need to. I was fueled by a decade of suppressed disappointment and a newfound sense of sovereignty. On the morning of the 26th, I called a locksmith. I want the locks changed, I told him. And I want a top-of-the-line security system installed. Keypad entry only. And I'm the only one with the code. By noon, the house was a fortress. The spare key Michael kept in his glove box was now a useless piece of metal. I walked through the rooms one last time. I looked at the empty spaces on the walls where the photos of Michael used to hang. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a project that had been completed. I grabbed my suitcase. I grabbed my passport. I walked out the front door, and I didn't look back. I was heading for the airport. I was heading for Italy. But most importantly, I was heading for a version of ZAHA that didn't exist for the sake of someone else. As I sat in the back of the taxi, watching my house disappear in the rearview mirror, I pulled out my phone. I saw another photo from Michael, a shot of him jet skiing. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I simply deleted the app. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was the one taking the opportunity. The airport lounge was a sea of frantic travelers and the rhythmic chime of departure announcements. But for me, it was a cathedral of stillness. I sat in a plush leather chair, a glass of water in one hand and my passport in the other. For the first time in my life, I wasn't traveling for a business trip or a family obligation. I wasn't looking for a vibe or a sponsored sunset. I was traveling to find the man I had buried under 40 years of fatherhood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Michael. Hey Dad, just checking in. Hope the leftovers are good LOL. Juana wants to know if you can find that old silver serving tray. We might want to use it for that dinner on the 2nd. Also, did you look into that liquid capital thing? Let me know. Love ya. I looked at the screen. The casual LOL. The demand for a serving tray. The immediate pivot back to the money. It was as if he were checking the inventory of a warehouse rather than talking to his father. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, crystalline clarity. He didn't even know I had left the house. He assumed I was sitting in the gloom, eating cold meat and waiting for his return like a loyal dog. Before I tell you about the moment I checked into my hotel in Positano, a moment that felt like a rebirth, I want to ask you something. Have you ever realized that the person you're saving is actually the one sinking you? Have you ever had to cut the anchor to keep the ship from going down? Let me know in the comments. Is it selfish to protect your own survival, even when it's your child on the other end of the line? I didn't reply to the text. Instead, I opened my banking app. I saw the Michael's Business Fund account, the one I had spent 15 years building. It held nearly $60,000. It was supposed to be his safety net, his bridge to the next level of his career. I hit the transfer button. I moved every single cent into my personal account. The screen blinked. Transfer successful. It was the loudest silence I had ever experienced. I wasn't just taking back my money. I was reclaiming my agency. I was telling the universe that my quiet peace was no longer for sale. I boarded the plane. As the wheels left the tarmac and the gray slush of the city disappeared beneath a blanket of white clouds, I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. I slept for 8 hours, the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who had finally put down a heavy burden. When I landed in Naples, the air was different. It was crisp, salty, and full of a life that didn't care about my past. I took a car to the Amalfi Coast. As we wound along the cliffside roads, the Mediterranean stretching out like a sheet of hammered turquoise below us, I realized that the world was massive. It was far too big to spend the rest of my years in a house full of ghosts and ungrateful demands. I checked into a small, family-run boutique hotel. The owner, a woman named Sophia with eyes that had seen 1,000 winters and 1,000 springs, took my bag. "You are traveling alone, Senior ZAHA?" she asked, her voice warm. "For the first time," I said. She smiled, a slow, knowing expression. "Sometimes, being alone is the only way to realize you are in good company. Welcome to Positano." I spent the next 3 days in a state of sensory overload. I ate pasta that tasted of the sea and lemons. I walked the narrow, winding stairs of the town until my legs ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of a man who was finally moving forward. I sat on my balcony and watched the sun dip below the horizon, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to check my phone to see if Michael had called. But the real world has a way of finding you, even on a cliffside in Italy. It was the evening of the 1st of January. I was sitting in a small cafe, drinking a glass of red wine, when my phone erupted. Not one text. 50. Not one call. 12. Michael and Juana had returned home early. I opened the security app on my phone. The high-definition camera I had installed the day before I left was working perfectly. The screen showed my front porch. Michael was there, his face no longer tanned and relaxed, but a dark, frantic red. He was pounding on the door. Juana was standing behind him, her designer luggage piled around her, her arms crossed, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Dad, open the door." Michael's voice came through the tiny speaker of my phone, distorted by the wind and his own rage. "What the hell is going on? The key doesn't work. The code is changed. Open up." He tried the handle again, shaking it so hard I thought it might break. Then he noticed the small, professional sign I had the locksmith place in the window. "Property for sale. For inquiries, contact the broker." Michael stepped back, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the sign, then at the camera. He realized I was watching. "Dad, are you in there? What did you do? Where is the money? I tried to access the fund this morning, and it's empty." "ZAHA, answer me." I watched as Juana stepped forward, her voice a shrill shriek. "He's lost it, Michael. I told you he was getting senile. He's trying to ruin us. Call the police. Tell them he's had a breakdown." I took a sip of my wine. The grapes were grown in the volcanic soil of Vesuvius. They were strong, resilient, and full of fire. I felt exactly the same. I hit the intercom button on my phone. "I'm not in there, Michael," I said. My voice was calm, amplified by the speaker on the porch. "And the police won't help you. It's my house. It's my money. And as of 3 days ago, it's my life." Michael spun around, looking for the speaker. "Dad, where are you? What are you talking about? We're your family. We came home early to see you." "You came home early because you wanted to check, Michael. You didn't come for a late Christmas dinner. You came for a bailout. And the bank is closed." "ZAHA, don't be a child." Juana yelled at the camera. "We have a life to lead. We have obligations. You can't just take the money back. It was promised to us. It was promised to a son who valued his father," I said. "It was promised to a family that didn't leave a 68-year-old man sitting at a table for 4 while they were clinking glasses in Tulum. You wanted a mental health break, Juana. Well, I'm taking one too. Only mine is permanent." "Dad, please," Michael said, his voice dropping into that wheedling, manipulative tone he had used since he was 10. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't think it would hurt you that much. We'll make it up to you. Just open the door and let us in. We have nowhere to stay. We gave up our lease on the condo to save money for the merger." I felt a coldness settle in my chest. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had planned to move in. They had planned to use my home as their staging ground for their next opportunity, all while I became their live-in ghost. "The merger is your problem, Michael. The condo is your problem. And the door is locked. Where am I supposed to go?" Michael screamed, kicking the door. "Go back to Tulum," I said. "I hear the infinity pools are life-changing." I disconnected the call. I turned off the phone. The cafe was quiet. The waiter, an old man who had seen 1,000 tourists come and go, walked over and refilled my glass. "Problems from home, Senior?" he asked. "No," I said, looking out at the lights of the boats dancing on the Mediterranean. "Just some old structures that finally collapsed. I'm just clearing the site." I spent the rest of the evening walking by the water. I thought about the prime rib at the soup kitchen. I thought about Elias. I realized that the empty chair wasn't a tragedy. It was a vacancy. It was a space that could be filled by people who actually wanted to be there. I looked at the stars. They were the same stars that Michael was looking at, but they felt different here. They felt like possibilities. The next morning, I received an email from my realtor. "Mr. ZAHA, we have 3 cash offers for the house. It seems the market is even hotter than we thought. One buyer wants to close in 10 days. How would you like to proceed?" I didn't hesitate. I sent a one-word reply. "Proceed." I was 68 years old. and I was liquidating the past to fund the future. I knew Michael and Juana would be staying at a hotel, racking up debt, waiting for me to cool off. They didn't understand that I wasn't angry. I was finished. Anger requires energy. Indifference is a superpower. I spent the next week in Italy, but I wasn't just a tourist. I was a researcher. I looked at small apartments in the hills. I looked at community centers. I realized that my 40 years of experience in construction and finance were valuable here, too. There were buildings that needed saving, and a man who needed a purpose. On the 10th of January, the sale of the house was finalized. The money, the equity, the savings, the life's work, hit my account. It was a staggering amount. More than enough to live 100 lives in Positano. I sat on my balcony, the morning sun warming my face. I turned on my phone for the first time in days. One message from Michael. It wasn't angry this time. It was a single, desperate sentence. The realtor told us the house is sold. Dad, where are you? I didn't answer the question. I went on my social media, the one I had deleted. I reinstalled it. I uploaded a single photo. It was a shot of my own feet propped up on the balcony railing, a cup of strong Italian coffee in my hand, the Mediterranean stretching out forever behind me. No filter. No hashtags. Just the truth. The caption was simple. Finally found some peace. No regrets. Hashtag ZAHA's life. I felt a sense of profound, soul-deep victory. I wasn't a placeholder anymore. I wasn't a safety net. I was a man who had survived the empty house and found a world that was waiting for me. Before I tell you about the New Year's Eve I spent a year later, the moment I realized that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, I want to ask you, have you ever had to be the bad guy to save your own life? Tell me in the comments. Is there a price too high for freedom? The wind was blowing through the willows back home, but here, the air was warm. I was 68 years old, and for the first time, the smells of my house didn't belong to someone else. They belonged to me. The feast was finally served. And this time, every chair was filled with the person I had neglected the most, myself. I hope this story of self-reclamation and defiant joy resonated with your vision. Would you like me to create a summary of the emotional peaks or a set of video tags to help this story go viral? The Mediterranean has a way of erasing the clutter of a man's mind. In Positano, the verticality of the world, the stairs, the cliffs, the stacked houses, forces you to focus on your footing. You cannot look back at the path you've walked without risking a stumble. For the first 2 weeks of January, I lived in that beautiful, forced present. I was ZAHA, the man who paid for his coffee in euros and watched the fishing boats come in at dawn, not ZAHA, the man who was worth less than a vacation in Tulum. But the silence of Italy was eventually punctuated by the digital screams of the life I had left behind. On the 14th of January, the cooling-off period was over. Michael and Juana had realized that the bank wasn't just closed, the building had been demolished. I was sitting in a small lemon grove behind my hotel, the scent of citrus heavy and sweet in the afternoon sun, when my phone vibrated with a long-distance call. I knew the number. It wasn't Michael's personal cell, it was his office line. He was trying to reach me through the last shred of his professional life. I picked up. Dad. Michael's voice was different. The arrogance was gone. The living my best life energy had been replaced by a raw, jagged desperation. Dad, please don't hang up. I'm at a payphone near the old house. The hotel kicked us out this morning. My credit cards are maxed, and the merger fell through because I couldn't come up with the buy-in capital. They've put me on administrative leave. I didn't speak. I looked at a lemon hanging from a branch, its skin bright and perfect. Did you hear me, Dad? I've lost everything. Juana is staying at her sister's, and she's talking about a legal separation. She says she didn't sign up for this. She says I lied about our security. ZAHA, please. I know I messed up. I know the Christmas thing was bad. But you sold the house. You took the fund. You've left me on the street. I didn't leave you on the street, Michael. I said, my voice as steady as the horizon. I left you with the consequences of your choices. You chose a villa over your father. You chose a jet ski over your family's history. You treated my life's work like a credit limit that would never reach its end. I simply showed you where the limit was. But $48,000, Dad. And the house equity. That's millions. What are you doing with it? You're 68. You don't need that kind of money to live in a house. You're right, I said. I don't need it to live in a house. I need it to live a life. And for the first time in 40 years, that life doesn't involve being your safety net. Before I tell you about the final offer Michael made me, a moment that proved he still didn't understand the difference between a price and a value, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to watch someone you love hit rock bottom because you knew that helping them would only keep them falling? How do you quiet the voice of the parent inside you that wants to catch them? Let me know in the comments. This was the hardest conversation of my life, but it was the most necessary. "Dad, listen," Michael said, his voice dropping into a frantic, hushed tone. "I can fix this. If you just wire me 50,000, just 50, I can get back into the merger. I can prove to Juana that we're still US. I'll pay you back twice that in a year. I'll even come to Italy. We can do a late Christmas there. We can make it a brand thing. Family reunion in Positano. Just help me this one last time." The brand thing. Even at rock bottom, he was looking for a hashtag. He was looking for a way to package his betrayal into something marketable. He didn't want to see me. He wanted to use the image of seeing me to fix the image of his life. "No, Michael," I said. "No? What do you mean no? I'm your son. Your only son." "Exactly," I said. "And as your father, I've decided to give you the greatest gift I have left. I'm giving you the truth. You are not a successful entrepreneur on a mental health break. You are a man who spent money he didn't have and neglected the people who loved him. Until you can look at that reality without trying to rebrand it, you don't have a father you can use." I hung up. I didn't block the number this time. I wanted him to have to sit with the silence. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection. I began to look at the town not just as a refuge, but as a site. My construction brain, dormant for years, began to wake up. I noticed a small, crumbling villa on the outskirts of the town, a place with good bones but a broken spirit. It reminded me of myself on Christmas morning. I bought it. I didn't buy it to flip it or to show it off. I bought it to rebuild it with my own hands. I hired a few local craftsmen, men like Elias from the soup kitchen, men who knew the value of a hard day's work and an honest meal. We spent our days scraping old paint, replacing rotted beams, and laying stones that had been smoothed by the sea. I was 68 years old, my hands were covered in dust, and for the first time in a decade, my heart didn't ache. It felt strong. It felt like a foundation. But the ghost of the empty house had one final haunting to perform. On the 25th of January, exactly 1 month after I found the note under the mat, Juana called me. Not from Michael's phone. Her own. "ZAHA," she said. She wasn't screaming. She sounded cold. Clinical. "I'm calling to let you know that Michael is in the hospital. He had a breakdown. He tried to force his way into the new owner's house, your old house. He thought you were hiding inside. He's being held for observation." I felt a coldness wash over me. The father in me wanted to scream. The father in me wanted to book a flight back to the gray city and the sterile hospital room. "Why are you calling me, Juana?" I asked. "Because he needs the money for the facility," she said. "And because I'm filing for divorce. I'm not going to be the wife of a man who can't even manage his own father. I want my half of the assets we were promised. My lawyer says that since we lived with you and contributed to the family brand, I have a claim on the house sale." I sat on a stone wall overlooking my half-finished villa. I looked at the bluebird tile I had carried in my suitcase, the one from my first apartment with my wife. "You contributed nothing but silence on Christmas Day, Juana," I said. "And as for Michael, tell him I've paid for his first week of treatment. I've wired it directly to the hospital. But that is the last cent he will ever see from me. As for the divorce, I hope you find a villa in Tulum that's big enough to hold all your regrets." I hung up and I called my lawyer in the States. "I want to set up a trust," I told him. "Not for Michael. Not for Juana. I want a trust for St. Jude's Soup Kitchen. I want them to have enough to serve prime rib every single Sunday for the next 50 years. And I want the remaining assets to be used for the restoration of historical buildings here in Italy. I'm liquidating the ZAHA name, Peter. I'm turning it into something that actually helps people." "And what about Michael?" the lawyer asked. "Michael is an adult," I said. "It's time he learned how to build his own house." I spent the rest of that afternoon working on the villa. I was laying the tile in the entryway, the bluebird tile I had kept. I placed it right where the light would hit it every morning. I realized then that Michael's breakdown wasn't my fault. It was the natural result of a life built on a foundation of cards. I had spent 40 years trying to keep the wind from blowing his house down, but in doing so, I had never let him learn how to brace the walls. By letting him fall, I was giving him the only chance he had to finally stand up. Before I tell you about the New Year's Eve that changed everything, the moment I realized that I wasn't alone, even in a foreign land, I want to ask you, is there a limit to a parent's sacrifice? At what point does helping become hindering? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to say no to save someone's soul? The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, a brilliant, deep gold that didn't need a filter. I was 68 years old, my bank account was being redistributed to the hungry and the broken, and my son was in a hospital room 3,000 miles away. I should have felt like a failure. I should have felt like the empty chair was my destiny. But as I looked at the bluebird tile, I felt a sense of profound, unshakable peace. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a safety net. I was an architect, and I was finally building a structure that was meant to last. The mental health break was over. The reality had begun. And as the night air filled with the scent of lemons and salt, I realized that the greatest feast isn't the one you cook for others. It's the one you have the courage to eat alone, knowing you've finally earned your place at the table. The following year passed with the slow, deliberate grace of a structure being restored stone by stone. I remained in Italy, not as a fugitive from my past, but as a man who had finally learned the difference between a house and a home. My name is ZAHA. I am 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have realized that the most important thing a father can leave behind isn't a bank account, it's a boundary. My villa on the outskirts of Positano was finished by late November. It wasn't the largest house on the cliff, nor was it the most modern. But the walls were straight, the roof was sound, and every morning at sunrise, the light hit the bluebird tile in the entryway, casting a soft, sapphire glow across the stone floor. I had become a fixture in the local community, known not as the rich American, but as the old builder, who spent his Saturdays helping the local parish repair their crumbling stonework. I lived simply. The millions from the sale of my estate were safely tucked away in the trust for the soup kitchen back home and a local heritage foundation. I kept only what I needed to live with dignity. I had learned that when you stop carrying the weight of someone else's entitlement, you don't need nearly as much to stay upright. But as Christmas approached once again, the old ghosts tried to find their way back. It was the 23rd of December. I was in my small garden, pruning the lemon trees, when my phone, the one I now kept on a shelf in the kitchen rather than in my pocket, began to ring. It was a local number, but I didn't recognize it. I picked up. Pronto. Dad. The voice was hollow, stripped of the bravado and the frantic anger that had defined our last conversation. It was Michael. He sounded older. He sounded like a man who had finally spent a year looking in a mirror without a filter. "Hello, Michael," I said. I felt a twinge in my heart, the old paternal instinct, but it was quiet now, a soft echo rather than a command. "I'm at the airport in Naples," he said. "I'm not coming to find you. I know I'm not allowed at your house. I wanted to call you. I'm heading to a job in London. It's an entry-level position at a drafting firm. It's not much, but it's mine. I've been working at a warehouse for the last 6 months to save for the ticket." I sat down on my stone bench, the smell of damp earth and citrus surrounding me. "I'm glad to hear that, Michael. Truly. I saw the photos you posted," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the ones of the beach. The ones of the soup kitchen back home. I went there, Dad, on Thanksgiving. I didn't tell them who I was. I just sat in the back and ate the meal you paid for. I saw Elias. He told me about the man who brought the prime rib on Christmas Day. He said that man saved his life, but he also saved his own." Michael paused, and I could hear the sound of the airport terminal in the background, the same sound of departures and arrivals that had been the soundtrack to my own rebirth. "I realize now that I didn't just miss a dinner, Dad," Michael whispered. "I missed the point. I spent my whole life trying to build a brand because I was too afraid to build a character. I used you as a foundation because I didn't want to dig my own. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to wire me money. I don't expect you to give me the house back. I just wanted you to know that the son you raised, he's finally starting to show up for work." Before I tell you about the decision I made that evening, a decision that would finally close the door on the empty chair forever, I want to ask you, does a parent ever stop being a parent? Can you forgive the unforgivable if the person asking has finally learned to stand on their own? Let me know in the comments. This was my final test. "Good luck in London, Michael," I said. "Work hard. Listen more than you speak. And if you ever find yourself at a table for one, don't be afraid of the silence. It's where the truth lives. Can I call you? Sometime? Not for anything. just to tell you about the projects I'm working on. I looked at the bluebird tile through the open door. On New Year's, Michael. We can talk on New Year's. But Christmas belongs to me now. I hung up. I didn't feel the old rage. I didn't feel the need to rescue him. I felt the peace of a job well done. I had finally given him the only inheritance that mattered, the ability to feel the weight of his own life. On Christmas Eve, I didn't cook a prime rib. I didn't set a table for 4. I walked down to the local piazza, where the town was gathering for the midnight Massachusetts. The air was cold, filled with the scent of wood smoke and roasting chestnuts. I was surrounded by people who knew me as ZAHA the Builder. I was hugged by children I had made wooden toys for. I was toasted by men whose roofs I had helped patch. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a safety net. I was a neighbor. On Christmas morning, I woke up to a house that was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the life I had chosen. I made a simple pot of coffee and sat on my balcony. I looked at my phone. There was a message from the director of St. Jude's Soup Kitchen back home. Merry Christmas, ZAHA. The hall is full. We have 500 people eating the meal you provided. There's a chair in the center of the room that we've left empty, draped in a white cloth. We call it ZAHA's chair. It reminds us that even when someone isn't here, their love can still fill the room. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. It was a good tear. A warm tear. Later that afternoon, Sophia, the hotel owner who had first welcomed me to Positano, came by with a plate of traditional honey-drenched struffoli. "You are alone today, ZAHA?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I am," I said, gesturing to the chair next to me on the balcony. "But I have found that being alone is not the same as being lonely, Sophia. Would you like a cup of coffee?" We sat together for 2 hours, watching the sea. We didn't talk about mergers or villas in Tulum. We talked about the way the light changed as the year turned. We talked about the beauty of a stone wall that stands for 100 years. As the sun began to set on my second Christmas in Italy, I realized that the empty house had been a necessary death. The man who had sat at that table for 4, waiting for a son who didn't care, had to die so that the man sitting on this balcony could live. I looked at the gifts I had given myself, a life of purpose, a heart of boundaries, a soul of peace. I pulled out my phone and I did one last thing. I opened the folder where I kept the photos of the old house, the one I had sold. I deleted them. Every single one. I didn't need the digital record of a museum that no longer existed. Then, I opened the camera app. I took a photo of the sun hitting the bluebird tile in my entryway. I didn't upload it to social media. I didn't send it to Michael. I saved it as my screensaver. It was a reminder to myself. The soul of the house is finally home. My name is ZAHA. I am 68 years old, and this Christmas, the house wasn't empty. It was full of the only thing that ever truly mattered, the courage to start over. The feast was finally over. The table was clear. And as I looked out at the Mediterranean, the stars beginning to glitter like diamonds on the water, I realized that I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me a best life. I had already built it. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.